What's going on, everyone? Seth Miranda here for Adorama TV, and we just got back from Japan because Sigma has had a massive event to announce a bunch of stuff, including a bit of a brand refresh with the new logo and new feel, but also a bunch of new toys for us to play with, right? We did a first look video going over all the stuff in general. I'll put a link to that down below, but let's focus in on the 300 to 600 F4 DGOS. This is what I think this is a huge deal, and I think this is awesome overall. Let's break down what it actually is, and I'll talk to you about my use with it, very briefly, what I did with it, how it felt, and all that stuff. But what are we talking about here? Well, a 300 to 600 F4 alone is just a wild concept. But when you mix in the fact that a 600 F4 prime alone from any brand anywhere at all is an upper echelon lens. I'm talking, north of $10,000, $12,000 in most systems. This is coming in at around half that price at launch, and it's a 300 to 600 continuous F4 the whole way through. Pretty crazy. So now we say, well, what do we got going on here? First of all, DG, it's a full frame lens, obviously. OS, optically stabilized, which is great to see up to 5.5 stops. And I'll attest to that. It was really good stabilization. We'll get into that later on, but let's go through what this physically is. So 300 to 600 F4, it is an internal focus, internal zoom. This is a big deal. This means it does not change shape. It does not telescope. Nothing is exposed. It's not going to suck in a bunch of dust. It is built to be out there in the elements, wildlife, sports, all that stuff. That's kind of what this is aimed at, and rightfully so, because that's what we know these lenses to be for, basically, right? Where you need that type of reach, and you're probably going to be out there in the elements. So it's nice to see here. On the back of this lens is where you start seeing some stuff. You got a focus limiter switch, which is really good to see. You see that on a lot of lenses like this. Basically, it's so that it's not using the full length of travel for focusing. It's if you're only be shooting farther out there, instead of the lens having a chance to even hunt on a wild chance, it won't, because it's limited to only a certain range of the travel to focus. Good to see. It's also got two types of stabilization. It has one for more of a static type shooting where you're in one place and you're just trying to maintain, stability. And the second one is more for if you're panning with a subject, think like car racing or something like that, right? That's cool. If you know what situation you're going to be in, just optimize that situation, optimize the tools you're using. Good to see. Okay. What else we got? Custom function buttons, which is usual on some of these things. The custom control ring is interesting. So when they first announced it, I thought that it was a full rotation ring, just an extra ring you can kind of program to whatever, but it's not. It's really a rocker with a very short throw. So you can program that to some very interesting things and further customize this lens to optimize the way you would work with it. Very, very cool. But what I thought was absolutely cool was the rear drop-in filter system. That uses 40.5 millimeter drop-in filters. I mean, this big instead of this big for that front element for it to be an F4. This is awesome for a few reasons. One, lower in cost. We like that. Two, easier to carry, and you carry more of them. And they're coming out with a fleet of different versions of filters for you to choose from, should you want like variable NDs and stuff like that. It's there, and I'll say this firsthand, they felt like really good quality, and it looks like they really paid close attention to those filters, and they know that this is a key to the system for this lens. Also on this lens, you've got yourself a tripod foot. It's Arca Swiss. It's got the quarter 20 and all that stuff. And of course, it's rotatable, which was nice for when you're hand holding it. I was flipping it onto the other side, so that's out of the way of my hand. And I could also hold it from that when I'm walking around. And let's talk about the overall size of this thing. For what it is, yes, if you take the lens by itself, you're going to be, this is a big lens. But in my opinion, 300 to 600 millimeter F4, I think they did a pretty good job restraining the size of this lens for what it is. Yes, you're probably going to want to throw it on a monopod. Yes, you might want to tripod it. I was hand holding it for the day. And yeah, at the end of the day, I was feeling it. The shoulder was kind of like, okay, what's going on here? But it wasn't unmanageable at all, in my opinion, for me at least. So your, mileage may vary depending on how you work, what you physically are capable of, or what you're looking to do, or the length of time you're using it and in what application. So I would say you're probably going to want to be looking at a monopod in this situation for this lens if you're going for longer durations with it, but don't think you can handhold it either, okay? I do want to talk about the autofocus motor, though, because they have an HLA-driven high-speed autofocus motor in this, and it is just that. It is really, really fast. I found it to be right there. I wasn't hunting. It wasn't taking forever. And when I wasn't even thinking about it, I just knew it was going to be there for me once I got used to the lens, which was pretty quickly. And it was very, very nice to just not even have that in my frame of mind, because there are some lenses out there that once they reach these giant, millimeters, usually when you guys are going for more of a budget thing, you get a slower motor in there, or like, not so many motors to work as fast and as accurate. And that's one thing I was worried about when I saw this thing come out. And then I saw the price point of it. I was like, oh, they probably saved the money in the autofocus. And I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, through this short use case, it just felt like the autofocus was boom, 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 right there the whole way. Very, very cool to see. And honestly, it was just like, really kind of fun to work with. One of the things I found that was really nice was the 3 to 600 zooming ring had for pretty much a short throw to it, which means I was going from 300 to 600 rather quickly. In fact, I was just banging back and forth between 3 and 6 more than like settling in the middle more than not. Because when you're working with something that's such a long focal length, you have such a narrow field of view that you're kind of not going to be, zooming out to see where you're going and then zooming back in. So I wasn't kind of wasting time with that. So if I felt like, oh man, I just need a little bit more in that frame, I just banged right back to 300, didn't even think about it. And if I wanted to, I could tighten up, settling around 500 if I felt like that's where it would be. But given what we were shooting, I had to act a little fast. Well, we'll go into that a little bit, but I do want to talk about one of the specs that I pay close attention to when it comes to lenses. Is the minimum focusing distance. So from what they're always going to measure from the camera sensor. And that's kind of important in this case because the lens is physically long as opposed to just like any type of normal lens where you can kind of get away with whatever they say being not that much of a factor. But from camera sensor to subject, it is a minimum focusing distance of 9.2 feet. And at the long end, it's 14.8 feet. So if you're someone that's worried about, if you're shooting wildlife and if something comes closer to you, just know on the 300 side, it's 9.2 feet minimum focusing distance. On the telephoto side, it's 14.8 minimum focusing distance. And I will say, with my habits as a portrait photographer and stuff like that, I was kind of running into that pretty quickly when it came to my habits when it comes to shooting in my style. But, I don't think it's going to be a problem for most people if they're looking to get that reach in a long distance. But just so you know, that's your minimum focusing distance. And, there's a lot to be said about a lens that is physically 18.5 inches long, and you'd think that it would be heavy, but I think they balanced it pretty well when I was holding it. So it's 8.75 pounds. So it's under 9 pounds, which is nice. But think about that. That's still 9+ pounds in your hands with your camera. But for some reason, however they had it going on, I was hand holding it and I didn't really feel it was unbalanced. So I think there's a discussion between not just the weight, but where that weight's distributed, especially when something is that far off of your camera. So what do we actually do with this thing? Well, I didn't have it in my hands for too long. I'll tell you that right now. So where do we go with this lens? Well, for the announcement, we were at Sigma headquarters and we were staying around that area in Tokyo, but then we were going to go to Aizu, Japan, which is where the factory is. We actually got to see how things were made, and that was amazing, by the way. And the area called Aizu that the factory is in is pretty remote. It was about a 5-hour bus drive, and it was beautiful out there. Incredible. The factory's incredible. But along the way, we stopped off at some places and saw some things. And one of the places they brought us to was Tsuruga Castle. I really hope I said that even remotely close to what it's supposed to sound like. But it was very cool to see that. There was a lot of people, touristy, and we were like, cool, we better start making some stuff happen here. So we took the lens. I borrowed my buddy Sam's Sony A7 IV and still had a cage on it because he's a video guy, but clicked into place, set some settings up, got going, and really quickly tried to get used to this lens so I could even feel it out, so I could feel out how to shoot with it. Because again, when you're shooting with a lens this long and your field of view is so tight, you've really got to kind of pick your shots and really be intentional with it. So we're walking around this castle. I picked up a few things. Obviously, the first thing I'm going to notice is all the people and how they're interacting. And with a lens so long, you can kind of snake through crowds and really notice some moments happening. And that's what I tried to grab people, getting together, taking photos together, influencers being filmed by their people or other hosts from other channels. Or I even had like this little kid with a toboggan or whatever you call it, a sled. I don't know. I'm a kid from Brooklyn. I don't know. But it was adorable. It was bright colors. It was around snow, which was bright and giving me all this fill light, which was awesome. And you definitely know what I'm talking about if you're someone that shoots long lenses. At f4, while that's wide open for 600, you really just want to watch how high that ISO goes, because you don't want that noise, but you also don't want to go too slow on your shutter to where every little bump you make is magnified like crazy because your lens is so long, causing blur, not from the subject, but from you. Then you worry about the blur from the subject, which is what I'm going to get into later on this, on the other stuff we shot later on the day. But here at the castle, I was just looking for like water dripping off of, melting snow, or just some architecture that was so far up there and way out of reach that I think, just being able to see the detail on some of this stuff was amazing. And I did a little quick, zooming in from 300 to 600, which you're probably seeing right now, the shots. So you get an idea of, the range you get with the 300 to 600 zoom capability of this lens. And I think we even saw a raven and a crow, and I got a few shots of that, the blue sky, the raven, woo, beautiful, right? Grabbed a couple portraits even because I was just trying to scrape together whatever I could find, because I didn't know how long we were going to have. And I'm in Japan and I'm at an amazing place and I have this unbelievable lens that I don't know how long I'm going to have it for, right? So grab some quick portraits of other people that we knew that were there. Max Loewenstein, what's going on, buddy? Got a picture of you and some other people. And just to give you kind of a sense of a little bit of the versatility, maybe if you were looking for that, but I was really trying to show you guys shooting through stuff so you can see foreground elements out of focus, separation of the subject to the background. So you really get a sense of what this lens looks like in whatever situation you might see yourself in. And when you're shooting a long lens, you guys know exactly what it's like. Something always gets in the way of that lens when you're shooting through things, past things, over things. And I tried to give you guys a bunch of shots like that. I hope you guys are kind of getting that vibe. I wasn't trying to, shoot some amazing masterpiece here. I was just trying to give you guys examples out of this lens the best that I could with the short time we had. I'm not kidding you. I probably had about less than 2 hours in my hands with this lens, but I think we got some good stuff here. And once we got back on the bus, we found out that we're going to go to kind of like some kind of beach, something that was like by water. And it was really funny because before we got off the bus, they're like, if we're really lucky, you might see a goose or a swan. And then we get off there and there's like 8 million geese, some swan, and 8 billion ducks. And I was like, oh, this is it. I'm going to get so many shots, and you guys can see some examples of this thing. One of the things I was really trying to be cognizant of was when you're shooting in water, or across water rather, you can get some atmospheric distortion going on, especially if there's water splashing. So there's salt in the air, there's vapors in the air. Luckily it was cool out, so there wasn't any heat bands, which I definitely have dealt with in some other videos. But here I wanted to show you guys how close you get in there with the detail on the birds, the water splashing being frozen. So I had my shutter speed cranked up pretty high because I didn't want any water splash to be blurry. I wanted to really, really freeze it so you can get a sense of detail and what it can render. Remember, this is on an A7 IV, so it was only 33 megapixels. We're not talking about like the 60 megapixels here, but you're getting an idea. And I was shooting at about 5 frames a second, maybe 8 frames a second. I wasn't going too crazy. I was just trying to like be more intentful with my shots. And yeah, we had bird autofocus on in the camera for the autofocus setting in this situation. And because I was worried about you guys seeing some distortion from the water, I was trying to shoot some ducks very close up, getting into the water, splashing through, getting through the waves or whatever you call it. The tide, maybe? I don't know, man, I'm such a city kid. However, I hope you guys get that sense too. And this was also challenging because it was a backlit situation. This was end of day. You can tell by the warm tones. There was a lot of low sun in the sky raking across. And so it was backlit, it was warm, and I was trying to balance for the warmth a little bit more so that wasn't full on orange. I'm not a big fan of full on orange when I'm trying to shoot things like this. And I even switched over to the panning optical stabilization, trying to catch some birds in flight, which I miserably failed. I think I got like 3 or 4 from the back but it does seem like the stabilization really works well with this lens. I mean, I'm hand holding this thing. The waves are going up and down. These birds are moving. I'm trying to stay with them. And I didn't feel like I was just shaking all over the place and couldn't focus in on what I was trying to do. And you can even see some shots where I have the birds crossing over each other so that it makes like different shapes and geometrics. And I do that mainly so I can show you I'm staying stable myself and waiting for the ducks or the geese in the back to align in a certain way to get those types of shots. So again, I'm hoping you're getting the vibe on this. And you can see the autofocus is working through multiple subjects, getting there quickly, getting me those shots. And you can see the separation in the background. We're talking about 13 blades to give you that shape of the bouquet, if you will. And again, backlit, and it was still handling things just pretty much fine. And this is a pre-released lens, you know, they're not saying that this is done. There's probably firmware that they're going to polish off for this thing. And, you know, as we go forward and stuff like that. So there was a lot of cool stuff that was able to be shot in a very short amount of time, you know, on a beach in an amazing location at an ancient castle. It was just really, really cool to be able to do that. What I think I was trying and I got stuck in my head about was I had this lens that had just had so much reach. And meanwhile, I'm looking at all of this, but I'm trying to dissect it to show you guys moments and things to peek through, from the people acting like people in by the castle to the birds being birds by the beach over there. And I think, you know, it's kind of one of those lenses that if you're in a camp that you were looking for like a 200 to 600 and to where you're trying to get that, for lack of a better phrase, budgety type wildlife or sports lens and with a nice range to it, or you were looking for like a 180 to 600, something like that. Think of this. You are now getting the capability of an f4. It's like a zooming prime, 300 to 600 f4 for a great price. And it's available for Sony E-mount and L-mount, which means Lumix, like if you're going to throw it on one of those, you know. So, and the L-mount seems to be growing, by the way. I'm sure more and more news will come out as we go along. I'm sure if you're watching this video back a few years later, there's more brands engaged with the L-mount. But either way, a lot of versatility with a lens that is typically very, you know, one-dimensional. So it's a super zoom. It's so tight in there. You've got the drop-in filters. You've got the fast motors. You've got the 2 types of stabilization. You've got the focus limiter. You've got the fact that it's not that heavy. It is manageable. You can handhold it. You can throw it on a monopod, tripod, do what you got to do. And I think you can customize it however you need for the way you want to work, how you want to shoot, because we all have our things we customize those buttons to, right? Either way, take a look at this one. If you guys want the full specs, all the nerdness, check out the links down below for those the spec list. You're not going to miss out on this one. If this is something you're really, really interested in, give it a shot. Try it out. If you can, you know, you can always hop into Adorama at 42 West 18th Street and ask to try one on your camera when they're available. You know, that's the whole point of going into a store. But you can also just, you know, see if this is the focal range you've been looking for, and is this in your budget? Because I'll say this right now, based on my short use case, I just think it's a phenomenal lens. I think it's very sharp. I think it focuses super fast. I like the short throw and the zoom, in my opinion. And again, it was balanced pretty nicely for me weight-wise. So check this one out. Do not sleep on this one if you're a wildlife or a sports photographer and you've been looking for something like this. I think this is a very bold design that they went for. I mean, they went for a spec that as soon as this came up at the announcement, all you heard was, whoa, from all these people. It was wild. And rightfully so. It's very, very cool. Let me know down below if you are interested in something like this. Are you a wildlife photographer? Are you someone that's been looking for a sport lens that has these type of specs? Are you someone that owns the primes, right? Are you a you know, a 600 f4 owner and you're going, man, I could totally go for something like this? Let me know the feedback. I want to know from you guys. You're talking to a guy that shoots a lot of portraits and, you know, studio stuff and really dialed in commercial stuff. So I want to hear from that community, because this Brooklyn guy is not going into the wilderness, shooting some wilderness too much. Those ducks were plenty for me. Anyway, if you guys want, go ahead and like. It surely helps out this video and this channel. If you learned anything from Adorama over the years, we'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe and the bell. We drop at least a video, if not 2 a day. Check out all the other channels, Adorama events for all the live demos, guys like me shooting live, Joe McNally, Lindsay Adler, Ab Cisse, all live coming out of that channel. And don't forget about the new Adorama Cinema channel. If you are a filmmaker or wanting to learn more about how to get yourself going in that regard, that channel is like on fire right now. So go check that out. Either way, I'm out of breath. I feel like I talked too long. I'm hoping you got a ton of example images out of this, and hopefully I did all right. Either way, my name is Seth Miranda, last ex-witness on all social, and I will see you next time. Later, guys.